Anne of Green Gables. Chapter 7. Anne goes to school. Anne started school in September. The Avonlea School was a white building with one big room. Inside were desks that opened and shut at the top. Marilla, I think I'm going to like school, Anne said when she came home. I met Ruby Gillis and Tilly Boulter, but Diana is still my best friend. And Prissy Andrews told Sarah Gillis that I had a very pretty nose. That's the first nice thing anyone ever said about my looks. Is it true, Marilla? Do I have a pretty nose? Your nose is nice enough, Marilla said. Secretly, she thought Anne's nose was very pretty. 3 weeks later, Anne and Diana were walking to school together as usual. Gilbert Blythe will be in school today, Diana said. He's been visiting his cousin all summer. He will be in your class. He missed a lot of school when he went out west with his father. He's in the 4th class even though he's almost 14. The girls entered the schoolhouse and sat at the desk they shared. That's Gilbert Blythe sitting across from you, Anne, whispered Diana. Don't you think he's very handsome? Anne looked across the aisle. Gilbert Blythe was a tall boy with curly brown hair and a teasing smile. Gilbert looked at Anne and winked. He's handsome, Anne whispered to Diana. I think he's very bold, though. It isn't good manner to wink at a stranger. But it wasn't until the afternoon that things really began to happen. Mr. Philip was in the back of the room helping Prissy with the math problem. No one else was studying. They were eating apples, whispering to each other, or drawing pictures on their slates. Gilbert was trying to make Anne look at him, but Anne was gazing out the window and daydreaming. Gilbert wasn't used to being ignored by a girl, so he picked up the end of Anne's long red braid. Then he said in a loud whisper, "Carrots, carrots," and turned and glared at him. She jumped to her feet. "How dare you!" she shouted. And then, thwack! Anne hit Gilbert over the head with her slate. Mr. Phillips marched down to the aisle. "Anne Surly, what does this mean?" he asked. Anne didn't answer. She wouldn't tell everyone she's been called carrots. "It was my fault," Gilbert said. "I teased her." Mr. Phillips paid no attention to Gilbert. "I'm sorry to see a student of mine display such temper," he said. "Anne, go stand at the blackboard." Anne did not cry or hang her head. She was still too angry. After school, Anne marched out with her head held high. Gilbert hurried up to her. "I'm sorry I made fun of your hair, Anne," he said. "Honest, don't be mad." But Anne just swept right past him. "Oh, how could you, Anne?" Diana asked as they walked down the road together. "I'll never forgive Gilbert Blythe," Anne said. "But Gilbert makes fun of all the girls," Diana said. "He laughs at my hair because it is so black. He calls me a crow." "Being called carrot is worse," Anne said. "Gilbert Blythe has hurt my feelings terribly, Diana." But that was just the beginning. Chapter 8. Gilbert Blythe. "Everyone has been coming back from lunch too late," Mr. Phillips said the next day. From now on, you must be in your seats when I return. At lunchtime, everyone went to Mr. Bell's spruce grove. Anne was at the far end of the grove. She was wandering around, singing softly to herself. Suddenly, Jimmy Glover shouted, "Master's coming!" The girls got to the schoolhouse just in time, but the boys had to climb down from the trees. Anne ran as fast as she could. She caught up with the boys at the door. Anne and the boys entered the room as Mr. Phillips hung up his hat and dropped into her seat, gasping for breath. Mr. Phillips didn't want to bother punishing 12 students for being late, but he had to punish someone. "Anne Shirley," he said, "since you seem to like the boys' company so much, I shall let you have more of it. Go sit down with Gilbert Blythe." The other boys snickered. Diana turned pale and just stared. "Did you hear what I said, Annie?" Mr. Phillips asked. "Yes, sir," Anne said slowly, "but I don't think you really mean it." "I did mean it," said Mr. Phillips. For a moment, Anne looked as if she were going to disobey him. Then she stood up and stepped across the aisle. She sat down beside Gilbert Blythe and buried her face in her arms on the desk. The children whispered and giggled and nudged each other, but they soon went back to work. When nobody was looking, Gilbert took a little pink candy heart from his desk. The heart had "You are sweet" written on it. Gilbert slipped the heart under the curve of Anne's arm. Anne lifted her head. She took the pink heart between her fingertips and dropped it on the floor. She crushed the heart with the heel of her shoe. Then she buried her face in her arms again. After school had ended, Anne went over to her desk. She took out her books, writing tablet, pen and ink, and arithmetic. Then she piled them neatly on her cracked slate. "Why are you taking all those things home, Anne?" Diana asked, to know when they were out on the road. "I'm not going back," Anne said. Diana stared at her. "Will Marilla let you stay home?" she asked. "She'll have to," said Anne. "I'll never go to school again." "Oh, Anne," Diana said, "what will I do? Mr. Philip will make me sit with that awful Gartic pie. I know he will because she's sitting alone. Please come back to school, Anne." "I'll do almost anything in the world for you, Diana," Anne said sadly, "but I cannot do this, so please don't ask me." "But think of all the fun you'll miss," Diana said. "We're playing ball next week, and you never played ball before, Anne. It is very exciting. We're going to learn a new song too, and we're going to read a new book out loud by the brook. You love to read out loud, Anne." But Anne's mind was made up. She would not go to school again. When she got home, she told Marilla. "Nonsense," Marilla said. "It's not nonsense at all," Anne said. "Don't you understand? I have been insulted." "Insulted? Fiddlestricks. You'll go to school tomorrow as usual." "Oh, no." Anne shook her head. "I'm not going back, Marilla. I will learn my lessons at home. I'll be as good as I can be, but I will not go back to school. Marilla decided not to say anything more about school just then. Instead, she went to ask Mrs. Lynde what to do. Well, Mrs. Lynde said, I would let her stay home for a little while. That's what. She will cool off and decide to go back on her own. The less fuss made, the better, in my opinion. Marilla took Mrs. Lynde's advice. Not another word was said to Anne about going back to school. She learned her lesson at home, did her chores, and played with Diana. But Anne had made up her mind to hate Gilbert Blythe for the rest of her life.